Alright, hi guys. So, Miranda recently had a question about the difference between bevel and extrude. So let us explore how both tools work on vertices, edges, and polygons, and what the differences are between both tools. So if I were to, let's just say, choose vertices, and select a vertex and do a bevel, you'll notice right away that, okay, so it did a sort of like rounding effect, and there's a lot of geometry in here. Now, if I go into the tool properties, you'll notice that there's a round level 7, and so I can change the rounding amount to basically give me more or less geometry. So that is how the vertex bevel works. Now, if I were to do an extrude instead, let's just say I choose an extrude, and I extrude outwards, right off the bat, I get a sort of like an edge sticking out, except it's not really an edge. And the reason why is because if I go into the tool properties, you'll notice that there's a width of 1 millimeter. And if I zoom in really, really close, oh, I just overshot it. But if I zoom in really close, you'll see that there is in fact more geometry. So it's not really an edge. So it's, it's a bit tricky in that regard because Modo doesn't really support floating edges. And whenever you do have it, it's basically a 2-point polygon. But if I were to take this width and make it a little bit wider, you'll notice that again, it's a sort of like a spike type geometry. And the other thing is that it's missing is that there's no rounding effect, right? So I can't create this rounding effect on a vertex. Now let's just say if I was going to work on an edge, if I were to do something like that, and I'm basically applying the bevel tool, I get, sort of as if I was chiseling away at this piece of geometry. Again, I have in the tool properties over here, I have the ability to round out the results, so I get something like that. Now if I was to do the same thing but with the extrude tool, let's just say I go out, again it looks like as if I'm extruding a single polygon, almost as if I'm using the edge extent tool. But again, if I zoom in close enough, you'll see that there is in fact more polys in there. And so it is still adding a sort of like a wedge effect. So if I add a width, you'll notice that again, it behaves pretty much like the vertex, but in this case, again, I'm just basically extending an edge. So that is the difference between the edge bevel and edge extrude. Now with the polygon, there's a few more functionalities, which is actually really nice. So let's just say if I was to pick these 3 polygons and I wanted to bevel. So I'm going to pick the bevel and I'm going to go outwards. Right now, it looks like an extrude, right? There's really not that much of a difference. The cool thing is, though, is that if you look at the tool properties, you can actually group or ungroup these polygons. So let's just say, if I was to, do that again. Oh. Okay, so let's just do that again, and then do a scale like this. But now I ungroup. You'll notice right off the bat is that now I have 3 extrusions. But if I click this button again, I can basically merge them or separate them whenever I want. At the same time, I can add segments pretty much just like I could with the extrude node. Now let's try to do the same thing with the extrude tool. So if I use the extrude tool, I extrude outwards, and I can add sides just like with the bevel tool. But the thing is, like you'll see right away, is that there's no option to actually separate these polygons out. They have to be together in this case. Now, the other thing that I actually didn't go into here is that with this tool, with the bevel, if I don't use any kind of extrusion amount, right, so if I'm not actually going to poke out the geometry outwards, and I do that, then let's just say I remove these segments, I get an inset effect. So no matter what, the edge's distance between here and here and here, it's always going to be equal, which is nice. But again, you can't really do that with an extrusion tool. Now the other difference between the extrusion and bevel is if I was to take a single polygon and bevel out, and then do an extrusion and extrude out, and let me just get rid of the segments here, you'll notice one thing right away, and that is when I selected after I extruded out the polygon, that there was 2 selections. There was the bottom and top poly. So right off the bat, you'll notice that the bevel is actually missing the original polygon. So it's almost as if the polygon, this one here, had been shifted upwards and the geometry around it was created. Versus the difference between extrude is that it still keeps the original geometry and it extrudes outwards. So this polygon and all the others around it were newly created geometry, and then this one is potentially the original piece of geometry. But again, bevel just shifts that polygon upwards and then does the extrusion with this new piece of geo. The other thing, again, to keep in mind is that, again, if this was just a single polygon, so let me just undo all that. Again, I can inset inwards like that with, with the bevel tool, but with the extrude, I cannot do that. Like, I have no option to do anything like that. So after applying an extrude tool, I would have to essentially scale the polygon down. But again, if you have like a more complex piece of geometry like this, then scaling it down just wouldn't give you the same effect. So if I was to, apply this and then run a scale or something, all right, I mean, it's just again, it's not going to give you the same effect. So let's just say if I try to scale, see what I mean? So you're always going to scale towards one point, and with this one, it's like all the points are shifting equally from their original piece of geometry. So that's pretty much it. I hope this helped. See ya.